This is a worm, and this is also a worm. The only difference is one lives on land and one lives in the water. On land, the scariest thing a worm can do is dry out on the sidewalk, and then they sit and wait for predators like birds to snatch them up. But in the oceans, worms become the predators. They eat things, they bite things, they grow over 10 feet long and are even able to resist sidewalks. These worms are all classified as true worms, but despite that, they fill completely different ecological niches. Why is it that only worms in the water are allowed to become monsters? And what could they possibly be defending themselves against in the ocean that land worms just haven't been dealing with? To find out why this is happening, let's take a look at the most obvious example of a worm affected by this phenomenon. This guy. This is Eunice aphrodito, also known as the bobbit worm. And if you couldn't tell, it can bite hard. Bobbit worms have adapted to become literal living bear traps, or well, fish traps. These guys can grow up to 10 feet long, but you almost never see their full body because they bury 95% of themselves underground. The only thing sticking out are 5 antennae that act like motion sensors. And what happens if something triggers them? Yeah, that pufferfish is cooked. The poppet worm strikes almost instantly and snatches the prey down so it can't escape. Oddly enough, the worm actually has basically no idea what it's eating. They don't really have eyes, just some light-sensitive organs. If something swims near their burrow, they strike regardless. After it strikes, the worm will try to drag whatever it snatches underground for its personal private feast. With large prey, though, it doesn't always succeed, so it usually tries to snatch a piece off. Surprisingly, in this case, it actually managed to get this entire pufferfish down, even despite that puffer being a thick fella. But you're probably wondering, aren't pufferfish unbelievably poisonous? Shouldn't the worm be dead? Well, that is actually a real danger, and that can be a real problem when you just go around biting anything and everything without looking. However, it's possible that the puffer doesn't get the chance to release enough of its toxins fast enough. If it doesn't inflate quickly, and if it's only biting a chunk of the fish, it may not always eat the deadliest parts. These worms could actually take a chunk out of your finger, but it's not super likely that they'd be able to bite your whole finger off, although I definitely wouldn't try it. Fortunately as well, we're definitely way too large to get pulled down into their burrow, but a bite from one will leave quite a nasty sting. But the creepiest part is that they actually are notoriously good at hiding. There are stories of bobbit worms accidentally ending up in people's home aquariums, hiding inside coral rocks that people picked up and stuck in their tank. The owners would wake up every morning to find their expensive fish missing or chopped in half, with no idea why, until they saw a massive worm retreating into the gravel. These worms can be hiding for years without being discovered. So why did these worms have to evolve to become monsters instead of just being little wriggly worms like earthworms? Well, on land, earthworms are decomposers. Their job is to just chill, eat rotting leaves, and occasionally get bullied by a robin. It's a humble, quiet life. And while they don't really have the option to defend themselves, this is what works. On dirt, the most abundant resource is all the decaying organic matter, and if earthworms can get in the soil too, they can continuously extract nutrients. They follow the safety in numbers strategy. It's kind of the opposite of what most people think of as survival of the fittest. It's just survival of there's literally so many of them that you can't kill them all. Their competition for decaying matter is extremely low, and they definitely aren't competing with anything like lions or bears for a couple of dead leaves. But the bobbit worm lives in the coral reef, and the reef is not peaceful. It's crowded, competitive, and full of things with armor and claws. To survive down there, you can't just be a squishy tube, you have to be a weapon. Dead organic matter is already extremely nutrient poor, but one singular fish is worth 1,000,000 times more than some soil nutrients. As their prey grows bigger and actually fights back,
The worms also need to grow bigger as well, develop real jaws, and set up life strategies a lot more violent than little earthworms. But the biggest reason these worms were able to get so big comes down to simple physics: gravity. See, on land, gravity limits sizes immensely. If an earthworm tried to grow 10 feet long like a bobbit worm, it would be physically impossible. It would be too heavy to move, and it would basically just be a floppy, sad noodle lying on the ground waiting to dry out. That body structure just doesn't work for worms, and it definitely wouldn't be able to move fast and strike hard. In water, though, their buoyancy supports their massive, grotesque bodies and takes the weight off. This allows aquatic worms to bypass the limits of size, letting them grow massive muscles, thick armor, and heavy jaws without collapsing under their own weight. A lot more violence coming from just water. And if you're a fan of extreme monsters, but brute strength and size aren't the only ways the ocean turns worms into nightmares. Other aquatic worms took a different evolutionary path. Instead of getting big, they got toxic. Enter the bearded fireworm. At first glance, this guy actually looks kind of fun. It's colorful, it's not 10 feet long, and it has these fluffy white tufts running down its sides that make it look like a swimming pipe cleaner. You honestly might even feel a sudden urge to reach out and pet it. Do not pet the worm. Those white bristles are thousands of hollow glass-like needles called chaetae, and they are filled to the brim with a powerful neurotoxin. If you barely even brush against a fireworm, these bristles are designed to instantly snap off inside your skin, releasing the venom directly into your nerves. The result? Well, they don't name it the tickle worm. The pain is instant, and it's described as feeling like your hand has literally been set on fire. It causes burning, nausea, and dizziness that can last for days. This is a strategy you almost never see in landworms.
Fortunately, these worms aren't usually strong enough to cause any lasting serious complication for animals of our size, as well as they're not really trying to be hidden like bobbit worms. They have what's called aposematicism, which is warning coloration. It knows it's toxic, and it knows that anything dumb enough to take a bite out of it is going to have a very, very bad afternoon, so it lets everyone else know too. Oddly enough, fireworms are actually a lot like earthworms in a sense too. They're slow, they're soft, and they're extremely easy to eat. The only reason they didn't go extinct in the reef is because of the fire. Interestingly, despite the bobbit worm looking massive in size comparison to the fireworm, it's only about 5% of the length of the longest worm in the ocean. This is the ribbon worm, and it's the longest animal on the entire Earth, longer than any dinosaur that existed, longer than blue whales, and definitely longer than earthworms. While a blue whale tops out around 100 feet, a bootlace worm was once found that measured an estimated 180 feet long. That is half the length of a football field made entirely of worm. But unlike snakes, which are solid muscle, ribbon worms are fragile and gooey. So how do they hunt? They possess a proboscis, a muscle structure they keep inside their body. When they attack, they turn themselves inside out, shooting this sticky web-like structure out of their face to entangle prey. It basically looks like the worm is vomiting a sentient root system onto you. And yes, it is acidic. It can actually cause mild irritation in humans, but very unlikely to do any real damage. These are more monstrosities by length, not real threats. But what's even the advantage to getting this long? Isn't this just a complete waste of space? Well, they're not actually trying to beat the Guinness World Record. It just gives them massive surface area. Unlike us, or even fish, these worms don't have lungs or gills. They breathe entirely through their skin. By stretching their body out into an infinitely long, incredibly thin ribbon, they are maximizing the amount of skin that touches the water. This allows them to absorb oxygen directly from the water around them much more efficiently. It's basically the biological equivalent of turning your entire body into one giant lung.
But there's also the laziness factor. If you are one of these bootlaces, you don't really have to go anywhere to hunt. You are everywhere. You can keep your vital organs tucked safely in a crevice while the rest of your body stretches out across the seafloor like a tripwire. Now you might think, if I was 180 feet long, wouldn't I just be a massive, easy target for predators? And you would be right, if these worms weren't still covering their entire body in that thick, foul-smelling mucus. They taste like death, and probably worse than what we think normal worms taste like. I will point out, though, that ribbon worms aren't actually true worms, and from the phylum Nemurti, but were given the name because of their obvious worm-like shape. Ribbon worms are also insanely thin, so they're nowhere remotely close to the mass of a blue whale, and the longest ones are literally still only about 2 pounds. Genetically, getting longer is a lot cheaper than getting bulkier, and the longest ones just kept evolving longer and longer. The same gravity effect that helped bobbit worms is at play here too, just on a 20 times factor scale. Despite this, there are actually worms that are not only long, but also thick. This is the giant tube worm, which is shaped like a giant tube.